At a bit of a loose end one weekend, we decided to head over to Paris, and instead of the ferry or paying $16.99 for 3 millilitres of beer on a cheap flight, we decided to try out the world-famous Eurostar, the one which memorably features in an abysmal Tom Cruise film. Now, okay, that doesn't narrow the field down by very much, but this is the one where they fly a helicopter down the tunnel, which is barely 1 metre wider than the train itself. We stayed in the Montmartre district of Paris, just around the corner from this rather unfortunately named retail outlet. Now, Montmartre is one of the more mountainous regions of Paris, and these stairs lead up to the front doors of our digs. But it's fashionably close to the Montmartre Cemetery, and I really wanted to do one of the great Paris clichés and visit the grave of Jim Morrison. The cemetery itself is a huge place, situated here on Airhead Street, and for some reason it's rather awkwardly squeezed in under a motorway. Despite its locale, Montmartre does boast one or two famous residents, including Alexandre Dumas Phil. And though this appears to be the final resting place of novelist Émile Zola, who was murdered in 1902 because of his vocal support for Alfred Dreyfus, the disgraced army officer, it actually isn't. He was dug up in 1908 and reburied somewhere else. I have no idea why. But what Montmartre doesn't have is the grave of Jim Morrison, which just goes to show the value of a bit of pre-departure research. He's buried somewhere else. So it's goodbye to Montmartre and a quick trip across town on the Metro, which is much better than the London Underground. Then again, riding a bicycle with no seat, bollock naked across cobblestones is better than the London Underground. Before we visited our second boneyard, we decided to really hit the tourist trail and have a look at the Parisian icon, the Eiffel Tower. It's the single most visited paid monument in the world, and at 324 metres tall, it was the tallest structure in the world from 1889, when it was completed, until 1930, when the Americans demonstrated their usual cultural imperialism and went one better with some concrete carbuncle in New York City. The funny thing is, when the Eiffel Tower was finished, everyone hated it. An 1892 letter signed by Alexandre Dumas and Charles Garnier, among others, called it "that black blot, that odious shadow of that odious column built up of riveted iron plates." For years, the restaurant on the second level advertised itself as the only place in Paris where you could eat without having to look at the Eiffel Tower. Now imagine that as a selling line. There are lifts to the top of the tower, but this was about a quarter of 1 queue just for one of them, so I decided, bugger that for a game of militaires. And I was rather put off by the sight of the rickety little lifts anyway. I'm not acrophobic, I have nothing at all against circus performers, but they did look a bit turn of the century for me. There are easier ways to get up there, and bizarrely, easier ways to get down. This is Franz Reichelt, who, in 1912, convinced the Parisian authorities to allow him to use the tower to demonstrate his patent parachute coat. And as you can see, as a coat it worked perfectly. And with a lack of compassion surprising even for the French, they hauled his body away and gleefully measured the crater he made when he hit. What did surprise me about the Eiffel Tower is its colour. It's this kind of sparrow brown shade, and I thought it'd be black or battleship grey or something like that. Now, it may be this kind of dull monotone during the day, but at night, it's a different story. And after that colourful interlude, I had finally got it right, and I was on my way to see the Lizard King. Now, there's a lot to see at Montmartre Cemetery. For instance, the grave of Susan Sontag and that of Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, who were buried together. And there's this one, with an elaborate sculpture by Jean Toncolai dedicated to his friend Jacques, who nobody seems able to identify. But what you won't find here is the grave of Jim Morrison. It wasn't my fault, okay? The guidebooks were all written in foreign. Okay, Boneyards 2, humble narrators, 0. But let's take pause to have a shufti at Paris the way it was meant to be done. From the deck of a boat. There are so many good reasons for seeing Paris this way. It's relaxing, it's kind of cheesy and touristy. You get to see the sights from ground level, or, well, below ground level if you think about it. And I bet Alexander Dumas and his foppish mates would have been all for it, because unless you stand at the pointy end and face the wrong way, you can't see the Eiffel Tower. Another good reason is that you get to listen to this tourist guide who is bored to the point of suicide in 2 different languages. But the best reason of all is that at the end of the tour, you're delivered right on the doorstep of the most famous flying buttresses in the world, Notre Dame. It's amazing to think that what you're looking at is 664 years old. Notre Dame Cathedral is the oldest Gothic structure in the world and one of the very first to use flying buttresses. Bits of it are even older than that because it took 182 years to build. Some of the statuary is a bit dodgy though, because during the revolution in the 1790s, some of those dim-witted bolshies thought that the statues of the biblical kings of Judea were actually representations of the French royal family, and accordingly they chopped their heads off. It's as spectacular on the inside as it is on the outside. 9,000 people can fit in here without rubbing shoulders. I don't know if you're not allowed to rub shoulders in a church, but apparently you don't have to. And Notre Dame Cathedral has played host to some truly historical events. Pope Pius VII crowned Napoleon I emperor right here in 1804, perhaps forgetting that the little bastard had all the religious piety of a hand grenade. Joan of Arc was canonised here in 1920. Since she was burned at the stake in 1431, I certainly hope the wait was worth it. A massive 10-year programme of maintenance, cleaning and restoration was begun in 1991, and as of 2009 it was in its 18th year, which might go to explain why it took 182 years to build in the first place. And they've got gargoyles, many gargoyles, and curiously enough they do look a lot like the Disney cartoon versions. But what they don't have, and have never had, is a hunchback. Bit of a pity really. Our next stop was even more of a tourist haven than the Notre Dame Cathedral, because we decided to go and have a look at the Arc de Triomphe, which stands at the western end of the Champs-Élysées, about which more later. Napoleon himself commissioned the arch in 1806 after the Battle of Austerlitz, so it's kind of a monument to French military prowess. And that's a bit like having a monument to Italian driving or romantic Australians. Nowadays you can get to the top of the arch. There's 247 stairs to negotiate, but what they don't tell you is that's 247 in metric, which translates as 1,500 in real money. At least it felt like it. There is light at the end of the stairs though, and after a quick trip through the tat shop, I'm not sure if this objet d'art was for sale, you emerge into sunlight and a new perspective on Paris. Though obviously the Eiffel Tower is centre stage. Sorry, Mr. Dumas, better luck next time. You can see the whole city from up here, from the Sacré-Cœur Basilica up on the Montmartre butte to Montparnasse Tower, which at 210 metres tall is still the Eiffel Tower's little sister, but it's so monolithic and out of place that after it was completed, construction of skyscrapers in Paris was banned. And where would we be without the Champs-Élysées, the widest and most expensive real estate in Europe? Rents here can reach $1.5 million per annum for just 90 square metres. And speaking of overpriced real estate, it's about time I got it right and did what I came here to do. A quick chat to somebody who knew the facts of the matter, that is, not me, established that I should have started here at Pere Lachaise Cemetery, which isn't so much a cemetery as a tourist attraction all its own, an Eiffel Tower for the morbidly curious. It's alive with famous dead people like Colette and Rossini, and this chap who deserves a far more prominent place in history than he has. This is Victor Chocolat, the French abolitionist, who died in 1893 after a life dedicated to the abolition of slavery throughout the French colonial empire, a campaign that was very largely successful. But this is him in spirit, but not in body. That peculiar French habit of moving the mortal remains of their grateful dead strikes again, and Chocolat now reposes in the Pantheon. Pere Lachaise certainly has enough space to squeeze this lot in, because at 118 hectares it's some serious real estate. Equally roomy is the Colombard, or crematoria, as you and I might know it. And just around the corner is this astonishing confection, the grave of Oscar Wilde, who died in self-imposed exile in Paris in 1900 at the age of 46. It's a tradition to kiss the tomb and decorate it with affectionate graffiti, a practice the French protest against in vain. Sculpted by Jacob Epstein in 1914, the centrepiece, the modernist angel, was inspired by the Sphinx, and up until about 1920 was anatomically correct in every way, whereupon a sharp-eyed cemetery gatekeeper armed with a hammer and a chisel got himself a paperweight that must have been a real conversation stopper. And finally we get to the object of the whole exercise, the grave of Jim Morrison, the Lizard King, Mr. Mojo Rising. The inscription on his grave translates as either down in hell with the demons or true to his own spirit, and that's about as wide a discrepancy of translation as I can think of. Morrison died in Paris in 1971, and his death remains something of a mystery. There was no autopsy, and as a result some people think he faked his own death, and it's partly due to this mystique that this nondescript, slightly shabby little grave has become such a huge tourist draw. And there are worse ways to be remembered. There's an old saying about Paris that if you sit in an outdoor cafe long enough, the whole world will pass by in front of you. Now, I don't know if that's true, but I've decided I might just stick around and find out for myself.
Hey! 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 Hey!